In 1989, Reverend Connie Fillmore, an ordained Unity minister and the great-granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who are the co-founders of Unity, was asked to summarize Unity's teachings in an article for the Daily Word magazine. The idea was to create something that would be used as a month-long study of Unity's basic teachings. And Reverend Fillmore condensed the teachings of Unity into 5 essential points, which we now refer to as the 5 principles of Unity. When we live in accordance with these 5 principles, we find that we are in a place where our lives are full and abundant and peaceful. They offer insights into how we can create our life experiences. And they offer also a feedback loop to keep us in the flow of abundance and joy and peace in our lives. And I have put these 5 principles to a song because I find it easier to remember things that way. And the 5 principles in song are 1, excuse me, 1 universal power, a network of all ideas lead to experiences. Take time to be still. You'll live in peace. And they build each on the other. Today, we look at principle number 2, a network of all. It is built first on the premise of the first part, which is 1 universal power, that there is only one presence, one power, regardless of the name or the understanding of that power, regardless of the way that we worship and respect and honor that power, there is only one universal power. So that is principle number 1. And principle number 2 feeds from that. Principle number 1, 1 universal power, also known as there's no spot that God is not. Principle number 2, a network of all. No spot that God is not, including us. In more wordy explanations, we are divine expressions of God, inherently good. The long way, human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. Our essence is of God, and therefore we are inherently good. We are inherently good. The shortest way for me. No spot that God is not, including us. I am, you are, we are one. There is this sense of being connected with God. If there is no spot that God is not, then that must include us. We tend to see God and the activity of God everywhere around us in nature. And yet we seem to imagine that God stops at human skin somehow, our own and other people's. And so this principle addresses that and invites us to have an expanded view of God as being not just out there, but also in here. God not just being out there in nature, but also being in and part and connected with all of human nature. So interesting, isn't it, that we see God in nature, but we don't see ourselves as part of nature somehow. And yet we are. And not only are we a part of that nature, that part of life that we call God, but we're all connected within that. Now, the idea of being connected with each other, and certainly the idea of being connected to God, may sound a bit blasphemous, maybe even a bit superior. But if all there is, everything is God, then how could we be anything but connected to God? How could we be anything but connected to all that is? We are all part of the same cosmic soup, if you will, of creation. And as I mentioned, we see a beautiful flower or a glorious sunset, and we have no difficulty seeing the activity of God in those things. But we have difficulty seeing God in the people around us sometimes, especially those who are difficult, who we don't like. Or we see God in cute puppies and kittens and in newborn babies. But we have difficulty recognizing our own Godness, our own connection to God, our own divinity when we look in the mirror. One is no different than the other. We are all expressions of God in human form. We are God expressing, energy expressing, creative energy expressing. And so we can never be separate from one universal power, because by definition, one universal power means there is no spot that God is not, including us. This can be difficult to wrap our heads around. Reverend Ellen Davenport, in her book, The 5 Principles of Unity, describes our divinity as humans in relationship to God as waves in relationship to the ocean, that each of us is distinct as a wave, yet is made up of the energy and attributes of the ocean. We are each part of that ocean, part of that divine flow, just as Jesus was. And he, Jesus, embodied for us, provided the example for us of what is possible when we fully align with the presence of God within us, when we become aware that we are the wave and we are part of the ocean. Deepak Chopra, in his wonderful book, The Third Jesus, says this, quote, "I want to offer the possibility that Jesus was, as he proclaimed, a savior, not the savior, not the savior, not the one and only Son of God, but rather Jesus embodied the highest level of enlightenment. He spent his brief adult life describing it, teaching it, and passing it on to future generations. Jesus intended to save the world by showing others the path to God consciousness." End quote. Jesus was able to love and forgive, heal and teach, because he lived from his divinity. He lived from his awareness that he was connected to God and to all that is. And he said that we could do the same. He said, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these. That's from John chapter 14, verse 12. This calls for us to have a new and expanded view of ourselves, a view that we are worthy, that we are as worthy of greatness as Jesus promised that we are, that we are as much a part of the wave and the ocean as Jesus was. On many Sundays at Unity, we sing that great song with the words, "We come together to behold that we are divine." How different that message is from the message that we may have heard before. I'm not so sure that it is as present in Christian teachings today as it was when I was growing up. But this idea that we are unworthy, that we were born sinful because of the original sin of Adam and Eve. I remember as a child being horribly disturbed that if a child was not baptized into the Christian faith, that that child would never get into heaven. I remember at some level thinking that that was absolutely unfair. I knew at some level that my God, a God of love, would never condemn someone to eternal damnation just because they hadn't heard of Jesus. I also remember thinking that although I wasn't perfect, that I wasn't so bad that Jesus needed to die on the cross for me and my sins, that 2,000 years ago, Jesus didn't have to do that so that I could be born and get into heaven and be good with God 2,000 years later. That didn't make sense to me. At some level, too, I was insulted on God's behalf, because the notion that all of us here are sinners needing redemption implied that God had made some sort of inferior product in the first place. And again, I'm not perfect. I'm not that bad. It was so comforting for me then to discover a different view of myself and a different place in the world as a result of this thought of, you're a part of God. Your job is to be an expression of God and be the best expression of God that you can be, that you belong, that you are a part of nature. Wow, so liberating. Every person on this planet, regardless of their belief system, is part of God. Every person, therefore, has a spark of that divinity within them, that spark of divinity and more within them, because God is all of it, remember? Although they may not always behave that way, they may not behave in a way that shows their godness, what we consider goodness. Each person is inherently powerful, creative, loving, and good. And our path is to accept and become aware that each person is good. That sometimes we have to peel back the onion to see their goodness, their godness. But there is no spot that God is not, including us. The essence of our goodness is called the Christ nature. We call it the Christ nature. In Buddhism, they call it the Buddha nature. In Hinduism, they call it Atman, this indwelling God. It's the divine in me and the divine in each of us. When we say namaste, for example, we are bowing to the divine in another person. The Sanskrit word namaste translates to I bow to the divine in you, or the divine in me bows to the divine in you. And so there is an awareness that all of us is God, including the unpleasant parts, and in each of us is the pleasant part, is the wholeness, is the goodness that we call the Christ nature or the Buddha nature or the Atman. But another aspect of this is that if there's no spot that God is not including us, then there's no spot that God is not including you and you and you. And so we're all part of the same system. Systems theory and the science of quantum theory confirms what Jesus already knew, that what we do to one of our brothers and sisters has an impact on us too, that we are all connected, that we are all part of an interconnected whole. And we have seen the impact of this and the truth of this most recently and most powerfully in the experience of the coronavirus pandemic. We've come to realize how interconnected we are and how what happens in one part of the whole will affect the entire whole, the entire group. A saying that you may have heard is, a rising tide lifts all boats. That saying reminds us that how we show up in life has an impact on the system in which we live. How we show up in life has an impact on our families, on our workplaces, on our marriages, on our children, on our parents, on all of our relationships. How we show up in life has an impact on not just the outer, but on our inner systems too. How we show up in life impacts our own health physically. It impacts our emotional resilience and our sense of well-being. Each of us is part of the whole. Each of us is part of the allness. I'm an eachness in part, as part of an allness, an important part of the whole. Now think about what our lives might look like if we were to live from this awareness that we are all interconnected and that there is this goodness within each of us. If we could think and believe and live from the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that whatever we do has an impact on everything, that we are all networked, then what are some of the things that we would do or not do differently? Well, for one thing, I would never want to do harm to another person, intentionally or unintentionally. If we could all live from this place, none of us would harm anyone else ever. And because I can't influence anyone else's behavior, all I can do is look to myself and say, I would aim to do nothing that will harm anyone. I will not harm anyone. That would be a goal. Because I know that if I didn't harm anyone, I am not harming myself. I am not adding harm to the system. You may have heard the saying, hurt people hurt people. And this is exactly what systems theory is about. It's the idea that if I harm somebody else, then they will feel hurt, want to discharge that hurt, and in turn, possibly harm other people. And so harm is introduced and maintained in a system. So my goal, do no harm. I would also not see others or myself as less than, as someone to be fixed, as someone who is unworthy. And instead of my tendency then to shame or to blame or to correct both myself and others, I would accept that each person, including me, is part of the wholeness and intelligence of the God of my understanding. That each of us, right where we are, is a necessary ingredient in the system of life. Does that mean that I won't strive to grow and evolve and expand myself? No, absolutely not. But it does mean that I'll strive to grow and evolve and expand myself. To accept that in my humanness, I am occasionally going to do things that I'll label as a mistake. But that does not mean that I'm a mistake. And I'm going to continue step by step to do my best to add no harm and to add more peace, more love, and more joy into my life, because that will affect the lives around me. And if all of that is true for me, then it's true for everyone around me. That I do not need to fix another person. I do not need to tell them what to do, even though as the oldest of 5, it is so hard for me not to. Just as I found that it was disrespectful to myself and to God when I was asked to believe that I was not worthy and that Jesus had to die for my sins. Well, so I disrespect God and the other person and myself when I imply to another person that they need to be fixed. Because what I am saying to them is that they are not worthy, and that is not true. I am the face of God. They are the face of God. We are the face of God. We are part of the same body. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, suggests that our mission is to express all that we can imagine God to be, that our mission in life is to express all that we can imagine God to be. And if it's true that there is no spot that God is not, and God is us too, that we are God expressing in human form, then if we were to take that metaphor of a rising tide lifts all boats and build on it a little bit more with this idea of expressing all that we can imagine God to be, then our goal must be to be an influence for the upliftment of each other. So we've got this idea that we are humans expressing as God. We want to be the highest form of, we want to express all that we can imagine God to be. We are all already God. There is no spot that God is not, but we want to be the highest expression so that we are an uplifting influence. And I had an aha moment that I want to share with you. If you have been in Unity for a while, you are familiar with the prayer for protection, which is written by James Dillett Freeman. And it reads, "The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is." We often include and recite this verse at the end of a service. And then we will say, the light of God surrounds you. The love of God enfolds you. The power of God protects you. The presence of God watches over you. And then we say, the light of God surrounds me. The love enfolds me. The power protects me. And the presence watches over me. We also sing a song where we say that I am the light of God. I am the love of God. I am the power of God and the presence of God. And yet there felt to me, for years it felt to me like something was missing and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Until this aha, which is to take the idea that we are God expressing, that even though we are not all that God is, we clearly are not the mystery and intelligence and energy that is God creating all around us. But there is no spot that God is not. And so we are God expressing. Then the whole idea of the prayer for protection can be rewritten like this. The light of God surrounds me can now be rewritten. The light you are surrounds me. The light of you surrounds me. The light of this group surrounds me. The light of this community surrounds me. The light of this relationship, this friendship surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me then could be the love of you. Your love enfolds me. The love of this group, this spiritual community enfolds me. The love of this family enfolds me. The power of God protects me. The power of you protects me. The power of this group this community, this family, this friendship protects me. The presence of God watches over me. The presence of you, the presence of this community, the presence of this family, this relationship, this friendship. The presence of you protects me. It changes things. The present watches over me. It changes things for me. It makes it more profound somehow. It personalizes our role in relationship to one another. And it goes the other way too. The light of God surrounds you. The light of me surrounds you. My light surrounds you. The love of God enfolds you. The love of me enfolds you. The love of that I hold and that I share enfolds you. The power of me, my power, protects you. The presence of me, my presence, my prayerful presence watches over you. Wow. And lastly, the light of God surrounds us. Change it to my light surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. My love enfolds me. The power of God protects me. My power protects me. The presence of God watches over me. My presence watches over me. Wherever I am, God is. Wherever we are, God is. Wherever you are, I am. Wherever I am, you are. We are one. Within the universal power, we are all connected. We are one. A network of all. Today and every day, I resolve to grow and continue to grow towards the goal of showing up as the face of God for myself, for the people I meet, and for the world. My goal is to be the light that surrounds, to be the love that enfolds, the power which protects, and the presence which watches over. I ask you to consider doing the same, to be the light, the love, the power, and the presence of God. There is no spot that God is not, including us. One universal power, a network of all. I bless you. Namaste.